Tom Campbell here. I and MBT Events hope you like this video. It was made possible by donations from our supporters. If you're one of them, thank you so very much. If you're new to MBT and find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. It would be very much appreciated. The links are in the description below. Thank you.
How has your relationship with your intellect evolved over the years? Is there a big difference between when you were a young physicist in your late teens and early 20s versus after you had done a lot of meditation with Robert Monroe versus how you are today?
Oh yes, it's been a lot of change over that time span. You just spanned like 50 years there, and there's been a lot of change with that. When I was young, in my teenage years, I was mostly an observer. I observed everything and everybody. I was just learning, see how things work, see how people were, trying to understand how people worked and how things worked. So I was mostly an observer at that point. I didn't say a whole lot because I learned more by watching than by talking. As I got into being a physicist and was in graduate school and that sort of thing, I probably grew a lot more arrogant. I felt that I was smart, knew a lot of stuff that very few people knew, and my ego got a little full of itself on that. So you feel like I have a good analytical mind, because that's what physicists do. They do analysis. They analyze things. They model things. That's kind of what they do. How do you determine this or that? You have to understand the logic of the problem. So it's looking at a problem, finding the logic of it, and then understanding all the variables and how they interact with each other and so on. So it's a very analytical kind of process. And most people, of course, if you're not a physicist, you don't do that much. You're interacting with things with that kind of analysis, particularly math-based analysis, is just not something you do. Well, anything you do, like as a career all the time, you get good at it, even if it's, polishing wood or emptying garbage cans. If you do it for a career, then you get to be excellent at it. So I felt good about that. And I thought as a problem solver, I could be really an excellent problem solver. Anybody had any problem in any field, anywhere, anything, if I just understood the basics and all of the variables that interacted in it, that I could do a better job of analyzing it than most people. So that's just was arrogance. That's not necessarily true. Okay, what I was feeling was I had an ability that was different than most people, and most physicists do, because that's what they spend their days doing. I wasn't that good at it when I started either, but after, 10 years of it or so, you get to be pretty good at it. So I'd say I was arrogant during that period, thinking that I was better, more logical, more rational, more reasonable than other people. And that was just not true, but it's the way I felt. So I knew better and knew more than most anybody else. That's probably through the late 20s, middle 20s to late 20s, probably was in that arrogant mode. But that was about the time in the late 20s that I started going out to Bob Monroe's. And a lot of that arrogance then kind of drifted away as I started going out there and doing the out of body, because I then realized that I was a very small part of something a whole lot bigger. And being a very small part of that much bigger thing, I felt like a bacterium on the side of the wall, in somebody else's palace, somebody else's bigger thing. And there was so much I didn't know, because I became aware. Before, my awareness was that I'm smart and I can do analysis really well. Well, that's a very small awareness. That's just kind of an awareness of me. not awareness of a larger world, not awareness of other people. So the awareness went from an awareness of myself a lot more to awareness of others, and then to an awareness of larger reality. And all of that is kind of humility inducing, that you realize just how little in the big scheme of things that you're aware of. You're not aware of other people. You're not aware of what they feel. You're not aware of what they think. There's so much you're not aware of. You kind of thought before that everybody was sort of like you, but they're not at all like you. They don't come to your same conclusions. They're very different than you. Their motives for doing things are very different. You know, what drives them is different. What they care about is different. And you only get that view once you start to grow up and, you know, don't see yourself as the center of the universe. You know, that's the growing up and letting go of your self-centeredness. So I let go of a lot of self-centeredness in my 20s. And when you can hear people thinking and you can feel other people's feelings, you can start to get a sense of other people being different than you. And that difference isn't not as good as, or not as capable as, or not as smart as. They're just different. They're none of those things. You have to stop measuring the world in terms of yourself. You know, that's an arrogant thing to do to begin with. So it was the learning to be in people's minds, to share their thoughts, to share their feelings, to understand where they were coming from and why they were coming from that, and realize that those attitudes were just as valuable, just as worthwhile and significant as any of my own. They were just different. Different people are different, and they deserve all the respect that you would give to yourself, you would give to them. So I learned a lot then through the 20s. By the time I got to the 30s, I was over most of that young man, young physicist arrogance. And from that point on, the world just started to get, well, bigger and smaller, I guess. The physical world got smaller and smaller as a less and less part of my life, and the non-physical became a larger part. And then eventually I integrated those both together so that they kind of all work as one. And, you know, so my intellect has changed a lot. Now I run probably 70% of my life out of my intuition and probably 30% of my life out of my intellect. As a young guy in my mid 20s, I probably was running 100%, or at least 98% of my life out of my intellect. My intellect had to decide everything. You know, my intellect would decide what's the probability this is a problem or that is a problem. You know, if I do this or I do that or I wear this or that or go here or go there, what are the ramifications? Will I like the results or dislike the results? And based on how much I liked the results or didn't like them, then I would make a choice. Most of it is all about me and how I would, you know, like or not like things. It wasn't a whole lot of consideration for other people or what they felt or whether they'd like it or not. It's like I figured everybody was doing the same thing I was. Everybody was kind of looking at things, doing their analysis and trying to optimize it for themselves. So if their optimization for themselves ran counter to mine, well, then that's the way it would be. You know, we would part ways. We wouldn't stand there and have that conversation. And if it worked together, it worked together. If it didn't, it didn't. And I didn't really see a whole lot of need to be any other way. So, you know, that's like the rugged individualism. Everybody be an individual and all the chips fall where they may and it'll all work out. Well, it doesn't all work out. It all works badly because you're basically arrogant, you're self-centered, and everything's about you. You're at the center of your universe. And you judge good and bad based on how well you get what you want. If you don't get what you want, well, that was a bad thing. If you do get what you want, that's a good thing. Well, that's just self-centeredness. So that was probably the biggest change, was say between the mid 20s to the mid 30s. I was over most of that by the time I got to the mid 30s. It was more about other people and about what they wanted and how they viewed life. And how could I be part of their solution to things and still do the things that I felt I needed and wanted to do. So it became more of a cooperative effort as opposed to me doing it my way, trying to get things my way, and you know everybody else would just have to take care of themselves. The old look out for number one, right? Kind of a attitude, which was very prevalent saying back in those days. And so I got over that in probably in a decade, from mid-20s to mid-30s, and then that has gotten less and less. The more you grow up, the easier it is to grow up more. So from then on, my decision space has been expanding. The choices that you have. When you get a lot more input, if you have a lot more input coming from all sorts of sources, some paranormal, some intuitive, some rational, some analytical, and you got all this stuff coming in, when you get that much information coming in, instead of just three choices, you see that there's really 50 choices. So your decision space grows. You start living in a larger reality with more choices. And that also is induces humility, in the sense that you realize that there's so much that you don't know. It just emphasizes what a small piece of a single player you are in a massive, large game. And there's a lot of things you just don't know and probably won't know. So it's hard to be too arrogant when you feel that ignorant. There's so much that you don't understand and you don't know, because the world's so big. You don't understand. I mean, you could look at that person and find out more about them, but you stop doing that. People are just who they are, and you interact with them, and you don't know what's driving them, but you have to respect whatever it is, whatever they're doing. And you have to wait for that little old lady to find her purse or a checkbook or whatever, and you have to do it with patience. And you have to let that person that's driving that car 10 miles an hour under the speed limit, in the middle of the lanes, that you can't pass her, you can't do anything, you can just wait. Or him, I said her, it could be a him or an it, whatever it is that is making your life such it's not the way you want it. You have to realize that that's a fact of life. Life will never be the way you want it. The problem is that you have a certain way that you want it. So give up wanting it to be that way or any particular way. Accept it gratefully and gleefully as it is, not as you want it to be. Well, that's partly getting out of your intellect, because your intellect is the one that organizes, it slices and dices and analyzes and says, here's the optimum path. This is what you want. So when that intellect stops doing that, and you just say, well, I'll take whatever I get, I'll deal with it and learn from it. So then you tone the intellect down and say, you don't need to do all that analysis about what's best for you. It's not about what's best for me. That's I don't need to spend a lot of time computing what's best for me. So it just grows and it grows and it gets bigger, and decision space just keeps getting bigger as you realize things and as you grow. So that's just a good thing.
You said that you now you live, say, 70% from your intuition and 30% from your intellect, whereas when you were maybe in your 20s, it would be almost all intellect, like your intellect was leading almost all of your decisions. What do you see? What is it that moved you more towards making your decision from your intuition? Do you think it's all of the years that you spent meditating and exploring the intuitive realm with Robert Monroe? How do you? Because I recognize myself very much in what you say about that. The intellect wanting to lead most of the decisions. So I'm curious how you got yourself out of that space and into the space where it was more your intuition behind the steering wheel for most of the part.
I think that was just a slow growth process of coming to that conclusion. It just depends on what You focus your attention on what matters to you. And if what matters to you is mostly yourself, having things your way and whatever, then you're just going to be more self-focused. You think, what happens in the world is you assess it and you analyze it according to, is that good for me or bad for me? Will I like that or will I not like that? So everything is assessed from the viewpoint of yourself. And that's a big inhibitor of growing up. And you change that, just slowly become more interested about other people and less interested in yourself. You realize that it doesn't really matter so much what happens to you. You'll deal with it. Whatever happens to you will happen to you, and you'll deal with it. You don't have to constantly be trying to optimize it, which is what your intellect will do. It constantly wants to optimize your life. And that would seem at first to be like a good idea. Well, yeah, optimize your life. But it's not. It puts you in a path for being self-centered, which limits your growth, limits your decision space. So as you change and you get rid of that ego and the fear being, it's not good if it's not the way I like it or not the way I want it, because the way I want it is the best way, the most functional way, the most efficient way, the proper way, the way it needs to be. And if it's not that way, then that's just not good. Well, eventually you realize that the way you want it is just the way you want it. It's not really the best way. It's not the optimum way. You just believe it's the best way and the optimum way. And eventually you find out that when you stop trying to control the world moves in ways that are optimal all by itself. It just works out. And I remember being astounded by that instead of trying to control what happened or nudge it or twist it or be at the right place at the right time, I just let stuff happen without really trying to analyze it at all, what was good for me. That when I'd look back on it, in hindsight, the things that happened were just the perfect things that needed to happen. Whereas in foresight, looking forward, I thought that I had to make that happen this way and this should be that way and this other thing needed to be this way. And of course, none of that happened. It all was jumbled from that because I wasn't making any effort to try to make it turn out that way. So it didn't turn out that way. But then in hindsight, I was really pleased that I hadn't tried to manipulate it to come out the way I thought it would be best, because I was not understanding what really the best was. You can't think that far ahead. But somehow the world just happened in a way that was just perfect, couldn't have been better. And I realized that had I manipulated that to come out more the way I wanted it, I just would have messed it up. But if I just let it happen naturally, it actually optimized itself. And that was hard to believe. Like, well, how does it do that? How does it just optimize itself for me? Is it not optimizing itself from others? And it's no, it optimizes itself for everybody. It'll just naturally happen in a way that is most profitable for you. That means you get the best opportunities to learn, the best opportunities to grow, the best opportunities and the challenges that you need, to grow up. And the choices you need all come to you. And if you had done it some other way, those choices never would have come up. And you wouldn't have learned what you needed to learn. So you would have avoided all those learning things because, well, that's not good. I don't want to have to learn things. I already know everything. I know what's best. And you avoid all those situations. But then after you go through them, you realize that they were really important, that you learned from them. You got something out of them. And it needed to happen. It needed to be that way. And you were thankful that it was that way. And that was took me weeks to kind of really own that, in the sense that if I try to optimize my life and what happens in it, all I'll do is mess it up, make it worse. If I just let it happen the way it does, without any effort on my part to make it come out any which way, and accept that and deal with it, in hindsight, I will be really pleased that I did that, because looking back, I'll say, oh, it's just perfect. All those things that happened to me couldn't have been better. I just didn't have enough smarts to organize something that well. I couldn't have done it. I couldn't have seen 3 steps ahead how, okay, I took this thing, which is something that was maybe a little hard, but that opened up another whole set of things that was really nice. It would never have opened up if I hadn't gone through that hard point. So it's that sort of thing. And I know it sounds very magical that your life will be optimized by fate. It's like, yeah, right. It doesn't sound like it's very rational at all, but it just turns out that way. It just generally turns out that way. That your life, if you just live it without trying to control it. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't plan anything. I'm not saying that you never plan anything, just wander cluelessly into every situation. No, you still plan things. You still try to, make good choices for right reasons, but you're not the master at the game, and you like to move pieces around. You need this person to do this and that person to do that and this to be this way and your children to be that way. And you've got this whole plan out the way everybody should be in order to optimize things. And then you feel angst and anger if it doesn't work and they're not being that way. You push and they push back, and now there's problems. And that starts to build, things that are really not profitable at all. Whereas if you just leave it alone, and if you think something should be better in a different way, you could say, oh, don't you think maybe this would be a better way? And if the other person looks at it and says, no, I don't. I think it ought to be the way I'm doing it. Then, okay, good. We'll do it that way. And then you find out that other people sometimes have the better idea than you. It's not always that you're the supreme analytical genius that you thought you were. Other people have other reasons. They see other parts of the picture that you don't necessarily see and appreciate. So you learn that then. That's a little more humility, that you get when you realize, oh, I'm glad I let them do that, because that turned out really good. It turned out better than if it had gone the way I wanted it. So I just, over about a year or 2 years, I just learned to let things happen the way they do. Yes, offer suggestions, but if other people, are more adamant about something, then let it go. And if it turns out they're adamant that it's like this way and it turns out badly, well, they've learned something. Good for them. They've learned something. And you don't have to point out to them that they've learned something. They just have learned something. And that's good, because now your interaction with them is going to be better because they've learned something. So future interactions with them will be sweeter than before because they've learned something they didn't know. So see, that's looking like downstream a couple of steps. All of our analysis is done like the next step. And a lot of that doesn't see the unintended consequences downstream. So you let that person do that thing that didn't work out very well. They learned something. Now downstream, your life is so much better because they learned that thing. So now interactions with them down, and all of those interactions downstream are a whole lot more productive than that one interaction that they did that was dysfunctional and caused them a problem that they had to learn from. So if you just let things go in the long run, so I say you have to look back some distance, but you have to give it time for things to settle out. In the long run, things turn out to be better if you don't try to optimize them with your intellect. The intellect doesn't think ahead all the interactions and the next interaction and the interactions to those interactions, and it can't think that far ahead. It just thinks to the very next step, and that's about as far as it goes. Sometimes it'll go maybe the step after that, but mostly it's just to the next step. And mostly that is not really the optimum step at all. To get the optimum step, you have to know the next 5 steps or 10 steps that are going to happen ahead. Then if you knew what the next 10 steps were going to be, oh, you could optimize back here, to help that, but you don't know. And it's just too much to know how this interaction will affect that, which will affect something else. And all that's too hard to do. So you just simply let it work out however it does. And people will learn, people will grow, and they'll like you a lot better because you stop poking at them and you stop demanding that things be your way because your analytical abilities are superior to theirs, you know. Well, that's again arrogance. So all that process of letting go of arrogance from like 25 to 35 was very valuable thing to do.
Yet we do have to also be careful that we don't take this on as like a principle, like let go of control, because it's a very fine line. You can take that on as like a rule and then risk becoming a very passive, disengaged person who
Yeah,
doesn't step up, who doesn't contribute, who doesn't take initiative.
exactly. No, you don't want to do that. You want to get out there in the world and be a part of it, interact with it. You just don't want to be pushy and demanding. But no, you don't want to go sit in the corner and let everybody do what they want. You need to get up. And if you have an idea that you think it ought to be that way, well, argue your idea. Put your idea out there and say, well, here's what I think, and here's why I think it. But if it's a collective decision and the collective decision goes some other way, accept it gratefully. Don't think, oh, those stupid people. They just don't know what they're doing. Grumble, grumble, grumble. Say, okay, that's fine. Let's see where this one goes. Have a better attitude toward it. But no, just being passive is not a good thing to do. Now you kind of give up your free will and you do according to other people's free will. It's not just do what other people want to do. That's not the message. The message is to not be pushy and arrogant to force your way on other people. That's the message. I think you should get out there. And if you have an idea, put your idea out. Argue your idea. Try to explain why it's better than, the competing ideas. And then when the choices are made, whoever makes that choice, then go with it and be all right with it. And if you think that choice is going to end up in a problem, well, then anticipate that problem and get ready for it so that when it happens, you can kind of help eliminate it so that it doesn't actually cause the problem. You're there. If I know that that bucket's going to have a hole in it because of what you're doing, you're carrying acid in it, that it's going to have a hole in it, then I'm going to have another bucket ready so that when that happens, I'll be able to keep a problem from happening. So be a good team player. Don't be aggressive, but certainly add your 2 cents worth. Share your ideas. Tell people how you feel about it. Tell them you feel strongly about this. But if you're not the decision maker, then it's okay. And you learn from those other choices. And if the choice that somebody else made turns out to actually be better than yours, learn from that and say, why didn't I know that? And you'll find out that that other person had information you didn't have. And that's just the way it is. But so many people, fight to the death, to get their idea across and accepted because otherwise it's going to be horrible if it's not my idea. But they feel like that about every idea they have. And that's what you have to back away from, not be passive. By all means, jump in there and do your thing. Just don't be pushy and demanding and the only one who could possibly be right. That's the problem, is that self-centered attitude. Yeah, it's a good point. I'm glad you said that. No, I don't intend to say that people should just be passive and do whatever anybody else wants because that's the kind and gentle thing to do. Nonsense. Contribute. You're not a contributor if you don't put your 2 cents worth in there and what you think. You're not helping the group. That helps the group by giving them another choice. Now, if you're the choice maker, then you have to start giving weight to other people's ideas, not just your own. You have to look at other people's ideas and say, well, what if we did it this way? What would that be? And you might say, well, that would be about the same as my way. It'd be a little different. I'd rather do it my way, but this would be a little different, but not really that much bad, worse. And then you find a whole lot of people would rather do it that way. Then you do it because the downside's not that big. So you look at other people's ideas, assess them, tell people what you think. Well, here's what I think's wrong with this, and then listen to what they tell you because they may have information you don't have. You don't know everything that they know, and they don't know everything that you know. So everybody needs to get together and share all the things they know and be willing to let the decision fall where it may. If you're the decision maker, then you have to be open minded that maybe somebody else's way is better than yours. But if it's finally up to you, then you call it the way you see it.
Yes. For me, it's the difficult part was always the stepping up and engaging, because I'm naturally an introvert, and I tend to just stay in my comfort zone, in my intellect, and I always tended to be on more on the shy side. So when a person like that encounters spiritual teachings that are about letting go of control, it's very easy to use that as a justification of staying in that comfort zone. And as you often point out, a lot of people have this strategy of, I can't lose if I don't play. Well, then the letting go of control can become the perfect justification for not playing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I'm not controlling, so I'm not,
Mm-hmm.
because, you know, so that was, for me, that was an important thing to realize and to work on.
Absolutely. You owe it to yourself and to everybody else that's part of your group, making a decision or coming up with some way to do things, to offer your insights. Figure out, you have valuable insights, or you may have valuable insights, or your insights might be trash. You don't know, because you don't know everything. So you offer them up and then see where the balance is and ask questions and find out and be open to it rather than approach every problem. How am I going to get these people to see it my way? You know, that's that's the wrong approach. But sure, you're not a contributor if you don't stand up and tell people what you think. So even if you're shy, you ought to express what you think about things because sometimes you will know more about a specific fact that's important than anybody else in the room. You'll just have more information on it and you won't be aware of it, but you will. And if you don't speak up, well, then you're not helping the group. You're not sharing your intellect with everybody else. So speak up, get involved, connect, engage. All of life is about that. Not just, sometimes to think, well, as you become more and more spiritual, you just kind of float above the crowd and you let the crowd kind of do whatever they do and you're not really a part of that. You kind of rise above them. You're detached and not a part of that hubbub anymore. But that's an arrogant point. That's not being spiritual. You really need to involve and engage with people all the time. You don't need to be a bully. You don't need to have it your way. You don't need to feel that you're smarter than everyone else. All that's not productive. But you should contribute what you have to contribute without any sense of, and if you don't do it my way, it's going to all, go up in smoke. Just contribute what you've got and see where it goes. If it goes badly, then everybody else will learn something because they made a decision that didn't work out. Well, that's valuable that everybody learns something. It's a good thing. So yeah, you have to have that attitude of being involved, but not being demanding.
Was it a big struggle for you to let go of that monkey mind chatter? Because you were such an intellectually dominant person in your 20s, leading with your intellect mostly. Was that a journey for you to get to the point where you are now, where you have like one every 10 shower?
No, I don't think so. I don't really notice it as something I had to work on. It's just something that evolved to be the way it is. So I don't even remember particularly focusing on it. As I grew up and became less self-centered, I just changed. And my mind start to have bigger things to think about, I guess, than just the monkey mind jabber. Or I was perfectly at ease thinking of nothing. Silence and I were friends. Some people abhor silence. If there's a silence, they feel like, something has to break it. The silence is terrible, but I don't feel that way. It's silence is fine. Silence communicates as well as words. But so I may just not say anything. I tend to be quiet in social gatherings because most of the things that I would say would probably not be understood the way I mean them. And I'd rather not be misunderstood. So mostly I don't have a whole lot to say. My ideas and things that I think are generally not all that common. I'm not all that in tune with the common wisdom, with the political correctness or whatever else my culture is into at the time. I am very often not aligned parallel to that. So I just mostly stay quiet. If I think, no, that sounds like I'm not engaging, but that's really, I engage if I think I can contribute. If all I'm going to do is start an argument or make somebody angry, then I don't. That kind of engagement is not useful. So you don't engage people by pushing their buttons and watching them freak out. That's not an engagement. That's better left alone. Engagement is where you can actually contribute something that other people can 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 use. But all the things you understand aren't necessarily news that other people can use. It just depends on, you know, you see things differently as you grow up. Growing up changes your perspective. It changes the way you interpret reality. And if you are talking with somebody that is your peer, that's equally grown up, then the two of you can talk very freely about anything and it works really well. If you're talking to people who are 3 or 4 steps behind you in growing up, then you have to be a little careful because some of the things you say just will not be understood. You might as well be talking in some kind of foreign language they don't understand because they're not going to see the connections. And it would just upset them or irritate them or annoy them because they would misunderstand what you were saying. So in that case, you just don't say things. So there's this line of being helpful when it's better to engage and tell people what you think, and it's better to keep your mouth shut. There's sometimes both of those. So there's a lot of things I don't say, a lot of things I don't tell people. I don't tell people about the experiences I've had in the non-physical and things like that because I feel it can't do them any good. They can't learn from it. It's not their experience. They won't understand it if they haven't been there and done similar things. And it's just not going to be helpful. And it puts them in the position of having to believe it or not believe it because it's not in their experience. And I don't want to put them in that because believing or not believing that then makes them want to judge me as to whether I'm making it all up, for whatever reason, for ego reasons or whatever else, or it's just it's real stuff and that's the way it is. Well, neither of those answers are necessarily right. It's not just the way it is for everybody. It's the way it was for me. That was my interpretation of that data stream. They got exact same data stream. They may interpret it differently. Their reality may be different than mine. So me telling them that, well, this is this way. Well, it was that way for me. So I don't really like to discuss those things. It puts people in a bad situation. They have to judge you as far as whether you're an egotist trying to make stuff up to impress people or whether you've actually had those experiences. And if so, what does that mean? Is that the nature of the reality to be that way, the way you describe it? Well, not necessarily. You see, it's just my interpretation of it. So any way they go is wrong. It's not helpful. Any which way they take it, it's just not very helpful. So it's better just to keep your mouth shut and not talk about it. There's lots of things I don't talk about. I probably share I don't know, 20, 30% of the things that I could say, I choose not to say. So I share about 30% of the ideas I have. So I do censor a lot of the things I say. I have to be careful when I say things that are being recorded like this, because one day this will go out on YouTube and there'll be maybe 200,000 people, a decade from now, maybe 200,000 people will have listened to it. Well, out of 200,000 people, you get all kinds of different people with all kinds of different attitudes. And might you say something that would hurt one of them, cause some kind of problem for them? Well, maybe. You can't tell. That number of people, there may be somebody out there just on the verge of schizophrenia, and you may, knock them over the edge, and they may lose it because of something you say. Well, you can't worry about all of that, because then you'd never say anything. So you try to do the best you can to say what you have to say without doing as little damage as possible. It's impossible to be sure that you do no damage, or you wouldn't say anything at all. So you just try to do little damage. So you stay away from hot button topics, because hot button topics send people off, and that's not helpful to them to do that. So you don't talk about hot button things. Not that you don't have an opinion necessarily, but it is dysfunctional to give an opinion, a personal opinion, to 200,000 people. That's not going to be helpful in general. If it's a hot button topic, all you're going to do is start a lot of arguments and fights and dysfunction and negativity, and it's not going to raise anybody's level of being or quality. So just stay away from things that are divisive, because they do more harm than good.
I did notice that you did speak up a few times with some controversial topics. So I
Well,
think you maybe you do have to find a balance also between
yeah,
standing up for what's right
exactly.
and avoiding controversial topics.
Yeah, it's a juggling all the time. Depends on the topic, depends on the audience, depends on whether it's going out on YouTube to the masses or not. All of those factor in. If I'm in a group of 5 or 6 people, a small group, and it's not being recorded, I'll be a lot more open and frank with things, because I don't feel like, it's going to cause problems. But I wouldn't take that same open, frank discussion and put it out on YouTube for 100, 200,000 people to look at it. Would not be appropriate. So it kind of depends on the audience of who you're talking to. You, you don't want to say things that hurt people. You don't want to say things that make people more fearful. Then if you do, you're just contributing to the problem. So this idea is, well, hell, I just tell the truth. And if you can't take the truth, then the hell with you. That's your problem. It's not my problem. I'll just, I'm the angel of truth, and I've got my sword here, and I'm going to slice it right down the middle and say, all right, there's the truth. There's where the truth is. And if you don't like it, lump it. That's arrogant. That's really arrogant. That means you believe that you are the keeper of the truth. You know the truth, and other people don't. And it's your job to help them sort that out the right way, which is your way. Well, that's just plain arrogance. So you can't just say, I just tell it the way it is, and people have to lump it. That's arrogance, and it's not uncaring for other people. You have to care about what you do to people and what you say. And if you say things that make half your audience cheer and the other half get angry, that's not helpful. Unless what you're trying to do is start a brawl in your audience, and that's just not helpful. So you just don't go there. You try to leave that alone. Yeah, I do venture out on the edge occasionally. Probably shouldn't, but I do anyway, just because I know there are people that really need that information. But mostly I try not to get too close to that edge.
So here's a question that I think we already addressed it, but let me just say it to you and see what you have to say. Is the intuitive side of us inherently less self-centered than the intellectual side of us? And is there therefore a correlation between being loving and living from the intuitive side? Can you speak on this?
Yes, I think it probably is. The intuitive side does not have the intellect involved, and the intellect is what is the judge, the judger. The intellect does its analysis and judges right and wrong and good or bad. And without that intellect being the judge constantly, it makes the intuition a little less, judgmatic, a little less arrogant, a little less. I know the right way. My way is the best way. So yes, I think the intellectual side tends to be more judgmental, and it tends to see its own side and its own viewpoint much more strongly than it sees anybody else's. The intuition can see other people's viewpoints as strongly as it sees its own, sometimes stronger than it sees its own. So yes, I think that's probably so. So does that mean there's a correlation between being loving and living from the intuitive side? Yeah, I think so. Those go together. The more you grow up, the more becoming love you are, the more you care about other people, and the more you live from the intuitive side. The less judgmental you are, the less controlling you are. The intellect is also the controller and the manipulator, and you do less of that. So definitely, I think that's the way it is. As you grow up, you tend to move more to the intuitive side, and the intellect is still valuable, but you use it when you need it. And when you need some kind of analysis done, then your intuitive side hands it over to the intellect and says, "Hey, intellect, this is your job. Take care of it. Figure this out for me." And it does, and the intuitive side appreciates that and takes that information, and they work together. For most people, they're so out of balance. The intellect is this huge, polished, burnished, thing that they've created over years and years and years of feeding it more and more information and understanding and going to classes and going to school, and they've got this intellect that's very well developed, and his intuition is just kind of a little rag doll sitting off to the side that nobody ever plays with, and that's very out of balance, and that's not so good. It's better to have those two more balanced so that neither one tries to dominate the other, and they just get along real well, and they share, they work together to solve problems. That's, I think, the best state. And when you're in that state, I think that you tend to be more grown up to get into that state. You don't get into that state unless you're fairly grown up. So yeah, I think there's more love there in that intuitive side, or maybe I shouldn't say more love. There's less ego and belief over on that intuitive side.
I and MBT Events hope you liked this video. We will continue to post videos for free on my YouTube channel, but please understand, these videos are expensive to produce. They represent many thousands of hours of production and editing, as well as all the necessary audiovisual equipment, computers, and software. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. It would be very much appreciated. The links are in the description below. Thank you.